Right, hello and welcome to the commemoration of the famine, the main famine that happened in Ireland. Sorry, now I need to search this all up. I believe it was 1845 to 1852 due to a potato blight. I did actually read a book about it. It was like the diary of a girl living in the time. I'm not sure if it was like written story or like actually factually happened. She moved away to America at the end of the story, but the diary at least. Um, it was interesting, but it was like before you had like all this peace and harmony in her life, and then all of a sudden you could tell something was immediately going wrong as the potatoes started dying and everything. So yeah, very interesting read. But the thing about this famine is Ireland still over 200 years later still hasn't nearly 200 years later still hasn't recovered to the population that it previously had. It's Erin told me that they used to have 8 million before the famine, and currently Ireland sits at 5 million population. So it's a significant amount of people who died, and again, Ireland still hasn't come back from what happened. So there's a lot of solemnity, mourning, heaviness in the air when, because not even just because it is an event that's just being done in Roblox, but this is something that's happened in real life, and millions, genuine millions, have died from this blight. So I think I don't actually know the British side of it because apparently I think they didn't do much to help when they were meant to be like. I'm not sure if they owned Ireland at the time, but they didn't do much to help either. I know that. So it is quite a sad and tragic event. But I'll try keep the facts in it and everything. But I believe we'll go from Killian starting off the ceremony here, or the commemoration. Not really a ceremony, but we have two. We also have his secretary. No, I've completely forgotten the name now. But we have David and Oscar, who are both act as the deputies to Killian. Dave acts as the main one, and Oscar is just a deputy. Notably, Oscar was appointed earlier today as the what's it called? Director General. That is it. That's the right one. Director General of the National Archives. There we go. But yes, that's the word I was thinking of. David is the Secretary General to the President, and Oscar is the Deputy Secretary General to the President. So this is literally the day after Killian was inaugurated for the second time. And by the way, I will say, please check out the interview we had last night with Killian. It was very fun, and I recommend everyone in Ireland watches it. It's very good. But anywho, we are just currently waiting for it to start because. Oh, sorry if you can hear my pings. I'm going to quickly turn those off. Right, we are beginning shortly. A few IDF members here, a bagpiper. Though it seems the bagpipes have gone into herself. So, rest in peace to them. Unless their heart is the bagpipe. Imagine that, just every time your heartbeat was just the sound of a bagpipe. That'd be horrible to live with. But again, some high-profile individuals here. We have Noah 135, Epic Noah 135 at the current T-Shock, Ocean Ithaca. Sorry, I that is one of the most confusing surnames to me in Ireland. Like, there's like, it sounds nothing like how I expect it to be pronounced. And then you also have Radarid, the Lieutenant General, which is basically, which is also the Chief of Staff of the Irish Defence Forces, and a member of the Garda. I believe this is an inspector. I don't know. I saw him not at the presidential inauguration, but I don't know what his thing was. Um, Sorry. Yeah, something noted by William there on more of the British perspective on what happened in Ireland. Um, Ireland had major Anglo-Irish landowners who did not live in Ireland and whose main market was in England. Therefore, the majority of food during the famine was still exported to England. The British government also did not help due to their laissez-faire and free market ideology, refusing to intervene in the market forces. So they did little to nothing to end the famine. Um, so yes, they were part of the UK at the time, so they would have. It would have been expected they received support, but no, didn't. That's English colonialism for you. It's not really funny, but. Oh yes, and we also have Dylan. Hello, here's some weird numbers in his name. I can't remember them. Just Dylan. He is the priest. Notably, failed his Lash nominations yesterday and left the Green Party subsequently after, in my opinion, making a mockery of himself. But right, Oscar is the secretary, no, the deputy secretary general to the. It's not secretary general. It's. Oh, I give up. I've forgotten it again. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. Again, words from Oscar. Please observe a few minutes of silence and stillness to allow for some photographs. So there'll be a few minutes of silence here whilst photographs are taken. Just gonna quickly move up here. Should probably actually get into a suit for this if you bear with me for a moment. But, I mean, again, it is a very solemn time and a period of reflection, really, of, again, the mourning of the people who died throughout this time, as I pointed out earlier and was pointed out to me by Erin. There is still a 3 million population difference between Ireland now, which is 5 million, and Ireland before the famine, which was 8 million. Because not only did you have the famine, obviously, which killed a lot of people on its own, but I'm pretty sure you also had lots of Irish people. That's when they started migrating to other countries. Don't quote me on that, but at least from what I read in the book I was talking about earlier, the woman there, she moved into the USA. So I assume lots of Irish people did that after the famine because, there was probably a lot of fear still surrounding that. And such. So it is quite an unfortunate tragedy, really, and which is why it's still commemorated and thought about to this day to make sure that we don't really forget about the troubles of the people in the past, of what they had to go through and what they had to deal with, especially with the famine and such a low population and just people dying everywhere. Like, starving to death, it's a horrible thing. Because it is slow and I would assume very painful as well. It still happens today throughout the world. You still have lots of people who fail to eat, so it's more, I would say, more than just a commemoration to the famine of Ireland, but a time of thoughtfulness to all those dealing with famine or a lack of food, maybe due to poverty or maybe due to the lack of resources in certain places around the world. But a priest will now read aloud the prayer in honour of those lost during the Great Famine. So that will be read out by Dylan Hello 20 here, as he makes his way up to the podium. I believe he would probably touch upon, the hopefulness that those who did passed on to a better place. And as a Catholic nation, Ireland obviously does believe in some sort of afterlife, of heaven. But Dylan Ho 20 here will begin reading out the prayers. Now, the first time I saw Dylan Low 20, I think it was for the it was I mean for the Nets what's it called, inauguration as president. But yeah, he does. For some reason, Victoria's reading it out.
He is ordained, yeah. He was a cardinal as well.
Oh yeah, yeah, former cardinal as well. Yeah, I believe one of the only Irish cardinals we've had.
Well, we had an Irish Archbishop of Dublin who became Pope.
Oh, we have had an Irish Pope.
Indeed.
Victoria touches upon the remembrance of men, women, children alike, of their time of suffering. Oh, my throat. But again, it is quite a sad time. There are lots of people in darker uniforms and darker colours. Just more prayer there, talking about blessing the land, the people. So it is quite important. Again, I touched upon this earlier, but it's important that we remember this not only because of those who lost their lives many century over a century ago, nearly 2 centuries, but also for those who are still suffering with famines and poverty and inability to feed. It's still a worldwide issue, and this is kind of a moment of reflection for all of those things.
Yeah. So a bit of backstory on the famine. There was something called potato blight, which was it's like a disease that destroyed the crops and like the soil. It made it infertile, and the Irish people were at that time in history quite dependent on the potato, which specifically was affected by the potato blight. Um, and it stopped the growth of them. So there was a massive impact from that. Like there was a shock because the one thing they could depend on couldn't grow anymore. About I think it's 1 million people died from the famine or related diseases, and 1.1 no, it's 1 to 2 million people immigrated to Britain, the US, and probably Canada and Australia. And then, the British response, who was at that time ruling Ireland, was extremely inadequate. And that's another reason why this is so important to us, because we had a government, well, not a government, we had people in charge that could have stopped this. They could have redirected produce. Instead, they kept exporting produce from Ireland, further worsening the effects of the famine.
Yeah,
And Hilsa
so
will now read his remarks prepared for the event.
yeah, so this is one of the many reasons why Irish people may still see the British as oppressors or something, because during their time ruling over Ireland, as peacekeepers, as people who should have been helping them, as a government who could have supported Ireland, they refused to and continued to serve in their own self-interest. So it still keeps that wound very open for those who still live in Ireland. Um, and it is vital to mention that still Ireland still struggles and suffers from the effects today of what happened. He says, "We are all here in commemoration of the Great Hunger." Oh, I can't read Irish or translate it. Might have to get Erin out for this.
Right, let's get Erin. Where is Erin? Is
Yeah,
she in the stage?
I'd hope so. A wound
Yes, she
still
is. Let me bring
felt
her up.
in what I like to call the national Irish conscience.
Here she is. Here's our translator, Erin from PG Caha.
In
After
one
all,
word.
hello. After
Yeah,
all,
but
it
what
was
was it?
merely
What was the
7
word?
generations ago.
What was the word, Erin?
I wasn't looking, I'm afraid.
It cannot be blemished out of our historical picture, however, that That's what we remark on today. I'm sure there'll be other Irish statements here, so we'll keep you up. Was not just a famine of coincidence, but also the doing of a colonial and genocidal power. So yeah, touching upon the British who did not help during the time and made it worse in many ways. A nation still growing, with fields still the emerald we know and love, was to exporting while starved. Sorry, punctuation threw me off there. So again, Killian touches upon more about the exploitations that the UK still demanded upon Ireland, so they wouldn't have to deal with the reparations of this incident, of this great famine, and Ireland suffered more in turn. This is the
Dan,
legacy.
Dan, are you the one in? No, okay. There's someone here in a Royal Guard uniform, and I feel like that is
Yeah, I don't.
disrespectful.
No clue who that is. I would not wear
We
that.
can-
I'm in a black suit. What
Yes.
we had been inflicted on us by nature was weaponized by a colonial power that saw Irish life as expendable and Irish land as profit. As William pointed out earlier, at the time, still a lot of it was owned by a lot of the. I think farms were owned by, the Anglo-British people who did not live in Ireland. The famine was not just a failure of response; it was a deliberate turning away, a policy of indifference and erasure. However, in spite of the adversity faced by generations prior, the journeys they embarked on would leave a lasting and visible impact.
Aaron, would you say the famine was an attempt at ethnic cleansing?
Well, many Irish historians would say that the famine was basically a textbook example of genocide
It was. And we
against
see
the
something
Irish people.
similar in Palestine with Israel blocking any aid, but except the British just didn't give any aid. No one tried helping.
Yeah, it's very similar. Like we saw it with during the famine, we did see that the Queen blocked any foreign aid that surpassed the amount of aid that she sent, which obviously was a very meager amount.
Yeah, and I feel like that's why Irish people are so very sympathetic and empathetic towards Palestine, because if you look at what is going on there, it's a modern day version of what the Troubles and the entire struggle for Irish independence and equality was.
Yeah, I will say they are very, very reminiscent of each other.
So it is the Irish famine. It isn't just about, like I said, there is still so many modern factors in it today that we must still remember, and that we must mourn those not only in Ireland who suffered for this, specifically those people, but also those who are still struggling with it today, like those in Palestine or Ethiopia not that long ago. We still have a lot of under different circumstances, but everyone has their own story, and each country, at least, lots of them do, with famines or mass starvation, especially in
And I feel like
underdeveloped countries. So
Yeah,
it
I feel
is a
like
very worldwide kind of thing.
it's very important to note as well that because the farmers could not produce any produce or cultivate their land effectively because the soil was infertile, they couldn't grow anything, that people were evicted from their homes, people had to sell their land, people were effectively marginalized and alienated by the famine because they couldn't. Aaron, was it fair to say that a majority of Ireland was like there were lots of farmers in Ireland at that time, and there still is, but like there was a lot
Yeah,
of
farming
farmers.
was
Yeah,
definitely the dominant trade for most
yeah,
people. But I do think it's worth mentioning that the blight was not just in Ireland. The blight hit the entirety of Europe. Yet nowhere else in Europe was famine to this level seen. It just directly shows how much the British mishandled the situation in Ireland.
And I think
Exactly.
from at least the diary I read, there I keep bringing it up, but that's the most extensive thing I've done on the Irish famine. But it spoke about their own parents and their own life on the on their farm. Um, and you could tell as it progressed, you could see like as suddenly there were no potatoes, suddenly they didn't have their crops, they were all dying, and you kind of just see how helpless some of those people were in the primal needs to eat, but they were unable to because they simply couldn't produce that kind of food. And the unfortunate thing about something like blight and potatoes, particularly, because they reproduce in such a way where they clone themselves instead, these diseases tend to spread very quickly, and because they also remain connected, I'm pretty sure. So we do have the president currently laying down a wreath on one of the stands there in front of the Irish flag and a monument to the Great Famine.
Could be a moment of silence.
Oh.
Kilsa laid his wreath to commemorate in honour, and now on Taoiseach Noah Epic Noah will lay his.
The leader of the opposition lays his wreath. Chief of Staff of the Defence Forces will now lay his wreath.
Aaron, whilst we're doing this, could you give some more historical context about some things you don't think people will know?
I thought we were observing like
I
brief
think
minutes of silence, but
really
no, carry on.
interesting one. A really interesting one is if you come to Ireland and you go to the countryside and you're driving around the countryside, there's lots of kind of half finished stone walls. And I think something a lot of people don't know is due to the lack of work, and obviously people were very desperate for work, the government set up these work schemes to build these famine walls. Like the salary was pittance, but at least they were getting something to take home to their family.
Mm. It was very it was work that was unnecessary, to be honest, but it was
Very, very
Yeah.
unnecessary work.
The Garda representative lays his wreath. I will say, a time like this, you see at these events no political divisiveness, or even in times of tension, just remembrance and such. And I think it resonates especially heavily in Ireland right now, at least in the Row Nation, with the issues up north in the border.
Yeah,
With
and just to touch on that, I think to honor our ancestors, we must speak out wherever injustice repeats itself, because the famine was not just a crop failure. It was
oh,
a it
sorry,
was
we're
it was
observing a
a
moment of
political
silence.
failure. Okay, well. The moment of silence is ended. And finishing what I was saying, the famine was not only a crop failure, but a political failure. And it was, I would, my personal opinion is they knew what they were doing. They knew the effects of withholding aid to Ireland. They knew what was going to happen, and that was their plan.
Amazing Grace on our play. I do quite like the bagpipes, especially with.
Yeah.
Oh, hold on. Um, someone's mic is playing the song too. So they can mute, please. But the bagpipes are a very beautiful instrument. Yeah. I believe that is the end there. I will say, as I was saying, so I didn't realise I shouldn't speak to booing the pipes, but oh no, they're playing the national anthem. Beautiful anthem there. I have to say, the Irish national anthem, a lot better than a lot of the other ones. But
Now, former Taoiseach Oscar O'Sullivan, Deputy Secretary General of Oras and Uachtaráin, well, Deputy Secretary General for the Uachtaráin, using the term, "The Mass is ended. Go forth and spread the light of the gospel."
very I just want to comment quickly on the bagpipes. I think they're a very beautiful instrument, and in some way, I can name quite a few good songs on them. And
Right, one moment, please. Sorry.
Oh.
But we have been informed Ahilsa Killian Clark will be coming up for an interview. And if you could bring the cameras, please, Dan, we're going to interview him behind here. So just bring all your kit with you. Should we? Yeah, stand around him like that.
yeah, just to finish what I was saying on the bagpipes there, not only is it really an Irish instrument, but I think it's also one used by the Scottish. Not sure about the Welsh, but I think it's right to say like the Celts or Celts use it, so but yeah, as we will be speaking with Ahilsa. Is that how you say it, Ahilsa?
Yeah.
Or otherwise known as the president here. So as I just get myself into position.
Can you get these? Who has admin here? Is Oscar still here? I should have admin, but they remove it for every event.
Testing, testing.
Hi, you're very quiet.
Oh god, not again.
Oh, I'll turn my volume up for you.
How about now?
It's fine. It's fine. I think it's doable.
Trina Ma, Hilse. Oh. Yeah, Dave, can you get rid of these peasants? I'll get.
I don't know why we're playing the Israel national anthem.
It is kind of a nice song, though, is it not?
A bit eerie though to play at a famine
I like-
commemoration.
Well, oh, Killian's in the wall. Thanks, Dave.
Given, you know, they are the manufacturers of a famine at the very moment.
Hey, girl.
Girl. Girl.
Boy, bye.
Why have we positioned ourselves so badly?
Okay, that is a great song. Can't even lie, great song. I'm wearing
Okay,
the wrong.
ready?
Yes.
I don't know what questions we're really going to ask on the famine, but we'll try our best.
Avon. Yvonne, my dearest,
Yeah.
do you have any questions prepared, or should I go?
President Clark, what's your opinion on? What's your opinion? Was it genocide or was it just a potato blight?
Well, such is the psyche of the British state that it's very hard to get into their mind. But given their history, if they are a genocidal power, then I'm almost certain that we can label what happened during the Great Famine a genocide. It wasn't necessarily as intentional or as visible as other genocides in history, and I won't get into case studies here. Join Trinity College if you want that. But what
Hey,
I will say is that I touched on this in my speech. A policy of negligence is a policy of cleansing, and what happened in the famine. I think the most important line from my speech is that what happened in the famine was not just an act of nature or a matter of circumstance. It was the British using what was happening as an instrument of erasure.
and
That's,
Hilsa,
that's very true. Grossly negligent from the British government.
Sorry, could you say that
Hilsa,
one more time?
It was grossly negligent from the British government in how they handled the famine.
Indeed, absolutely.
Hilsa, in your speech, you said Ireland must remain a beacon of reason, justice, and moral clarity. Was this in reference to the ongoing issues on the Northern Irish border?
Ireland is no stranger to tension and to attempting and wrestling with the challenge of rectifying deep-seated differences. And I think our border is very obviously the symbol of that. I don't personally like using history to comment and narrate what is happening now because circumstances are always going to be different. But all I will say is that when, and I say when because it is only natural, when we have tension with identity and our sovereignty is being pushed to its very limits, that we remain a beacon of understanding and that we always prioritize dialogue over the raising of arms.
You said here, a few things before, but also the doing of a colonial and genocidal power. Could you elaborate more what you meant by this?
Well, it is without a doubt the British state, or at least its former empire, very much has a history of colonialism. That is a very much undisputed fact. And that Ireland was certainly the face of this at many times, despite being an island on the immediate shores of Britain, despite, being placed quite literally on the outskirts of the British homeland, we were labeled, we were dehumanized. We were labeled things other than human, subhuman, uh, parallel to human, although different. And I think even Churchill had some very, very strange racial theory. So it's important to note that Britain's history is written alongside technological advancement and alongside their service to, the burdened third world countries. That Britain has a hand to play in the poverty and deprivation of those countries nowadays, and it certainly had a hand to play in the genocides of many of those countries and nations.
Oh, I assume no one's.
You slightly the anti-Irish sentiment that we saw, especially with the Irish diaspora spreading out across the world, particularly London. We saw things like the "No Dogs, No Irish" signs being put up in housing and jobs. Would you say that we're seeing a repeat of this anti-Irish sentiment again, but in our own communities? I believe RT did discuss this the other night, especially in Gibraltar and in Northern Ireland, that Irish people are just constantly being discriminated against just because they're Irish.
That's a very important point to make, I will say, and I'm sure that it evokes imagery of the Irish need not apply signs that we saw across the globe historically. Um, Anti-Irish sentiment has been a thing since I've been in this community, since 2020. It has been a thing throughout the globe, I will say. More recently, it's been a thing throughout the globe because of our influence. And where there is power and influence, there is a natural imbalance to that. So, when Ireland was elected to the Permanent Five, we were put under immediate scrutiny. And if you went into UN General right now and discussed how much you love Ireland, I'm sure you would be met with that scrutiny face to face. That being said, that is only a thing of recent. That is a figment of recent advancements in our diplomacy. Anti-Irish sentiment in the British community has been a thing for quite some time. Middletown and Glasgow, before there was such a hardline border, I should say, when you crossed it into Middletown, people recognize you from the if you're a counterpart from the Republic of Ireland and they recognize you in Middletown in that role, you would be called a Fenian. You would be called a Fenian. You would be mocked. I have memories of Sinn Féin and the Unionist Party, the Ulster Unionist Party, both campaigning in Middletown for the Assembly elections back in 2020. And that was legitimate tension. You had people without reason, without discussion of policy and substance, labeling one another prods, and the sectarianism was a thing back then. It's less of a thing now, but it is certainly still around. And I find that the heels and wounds and the effects of unification in 2022, I don't think we're yet over them.
And Hilsa, in your speech, you said the famine teaches us to stand against oppression, never to be silent in the face of destruction of people or culture. Well, once again, I'm going to bring it back to the Troubles in Northern Ireland. How do you suggest that the ordinary, run-of-the-mill Irish person stands against oppression? And how do you suggest that they do not lose the light of the reason why they are standing against this oppression? How do you suggest that we as a nation move forward united against this?
Well, I don't see myself as a Republican figure, and I don't see myself necessarily as a figure that advocates strongly for unification or for Republican sentiment in Northern Ireland. Because when I use words like that, and when I make statements in an effort, to resist oppression, the cause that I am trying to rally is the cause of dialogue and of compromise. And ultimately, it is compromise that creates that inclines people to coalesce around a state and institutions, and it creates trust. So when I ask people to resist oppression, you should be doing it in the interest of reconciliation, never in the interest of you and your ideology solely. I don't think that is what resisting oppression is, and I think ultimately the resistance to oppression. And I actually use the word oppression because ultimately there is going to be a political establishment in Ulster and in Northern Ireland. I do believe that the current mayor of Middletown is an extension of that. Someone who has very deep ties with the British government nationally. I believe he shares a surname with the Prime Minister, as a matter of fact. So there is a political establishment in Northern Ireland. And although it is not oppressive in the sense that we would understand it, which is guns and weapons pointed at armed civilians, it is oppression in that there are key people who consider themselves Irish, to be lacking representation, and that is a form of oppression, which we should be resisting, not in the interest of republicanism, but in the interest of reconciliation.
And sorry,
Oh,
one moment, sorry. I've just been notified by the Secretary General of the Oireachtas. Leinster House will, from henceforth, be adopting additional security measures due to the recent announcement by the INLA. I'm unsure what the announcement entails, but if they could get back to me on that, then I would be able to report to you. Back to Dan.
I will quickly say about the INLA, they have wanted a few statements read off by RTE. They're basically trying to support Ulster and independence there, I believe. Um, dealing with the issues that are happening up north. So it would probably be something to do with that. Anywho, you did quote Connor Novak saying, "Painted the world with our culture." Do you think, as a president, you have succeeded in this, especially in more on the global stage?
Well, um, certainly it's a lot harder to do. But I want to start. Actually, I want to preface my remarks with Connor Novak was a visionary for his time. I read the statements of my predecessors today after authoring my own, and I have to say that the one that stood out to me the most was his statement, conveniently not as president but as governor general. Um, Despite being an arm of the British state, it is notable that he was not an oppressive force, and that is a testament to my remarks 5 minutes ago, which is that we should be pursuing peace and resisting oppression in the interest of reconciliation, not of self-interests. And Conor Novak's work as Governor General and his statement on the famine during that capacity is certainly a good example of that. But in terms of painting the world with our culture, I was obviously referring to the diaspora internationally, and how something so strangely and fascinatingly beautiful came of the hellscape that was the Great Famine on Gurta Moor. Um, on Roblox, it's not the same in that we're not necessarily sharing culture. The closest thing we get to culture is just Irish pop culture. So me sending a CMAT music video into Ireland General, or something along those lines. But I think the best service that this community offers, and I could be wrong on this, but it's my opinion, is that we offer quite literally a connection for people of the diaspora, because we make jokes about Yanks who come in and call themselves 10% Irish, but ultimately what those people pursue and seek is a community free of judgment, and ultimately Ireland offers that alongside being the Republic of Ireland. So I think we have a key role to play in that. Conor Novak thought that way too. Um, so ultimately that's another one of the many reasons we should be a space that is liberated from hate and I will say harsh judgment.
So, could I quickly read out some questions from people who've called in? The presenters fine with that? Okay. I have one here that says there have been numerous famines. Okay. There have been numerous famines in India during British rule, which shows there is a pattern of British imperial negligence in dealing with food security. India, as an example, is very scary as it's similar to the Irish famine due to exporting a lot of their food production, laissez laissez-faire, economics, and failed British bureaucracy. Millions of people died. Does the President agree that the British pattern with famines are a general disregard for non-English people in their colonial empire?
Well, I want to preface my answer with the simple fact that Britain is not what it once was, both in real life and on Roblox. It is not always a living, breathing, oppressive force. It has the capacity to be, and often it is, but it isn't always that force. It has been a community, on and off, that has sometimes been safe, sometimes been liberated from judgment and hate. But that is something that is more. It's more delicate in the United Kingdom than what we have, the infrastructure we have here. But speaking historically, yes, the United Kingdom has a really indefensible history. Um, and I will say, actually, I have an important point to make, and it's that I remember. I think it's calmed down now, but certainly in 2020 during COVID, there was a history of tearing down statues of people who arguably are symbols of hate. I think maybe there is a fair argument to be had in tearing down those statues from a public and visible space, but it's important that we maintain them, because history, if we remove it, cannot be taught. And the statue being present there isn't necessarily the promotion of their values. And when you remove it, what it prevents educators and adults and wiser people from doing is pointing at that statue and saying, this is what we can never become. This is what we can never stand for. So it's important we don't erase history in that regard. But ultimately, when it comes to being conscious of history, yes, India is a fine example. I'm not as knowledgeable on the famines there, but what I do know is that in the East, Britain left a horrible legacy of division, of certainly oppression, and absolutely the main benefactor of British rule in these far off colonial states was negligence. They neglected their duties as whether you like it or not, they were the government there at the time, and they neglected their duties and their role as the government of those colonial states.
I just have one more viewer question here. Um, my question for Killian is his thoughts on Conor Novak, former president and champion of Ireland, being Prime Minister of the UK and colonising Ireland under the banner of the British Empire.
What if I love that question. Whoever asked that, you get brownie points. I think people forget sometimes because Conor Novak is the face of Fenians in modern day Ireland, a title one day people should be lucky enough to claim. But I think people forget, and I think what I will say, I've made this point a long time actually, is that I think we are deprived of an experience in the United Kingdom. A lot of people enjoy the politics of the United Kingdom and the community of the United Kingdom, but haven't sought big roles there because of the division between Ireland and the United Kingdom. Um, Conor Novak, unlike us new generations, had a long, long, extensive history in that group. He had been prime minister. He had been in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office 3 years, I think, as a civil servant, and he was prime minister ultimately. And he did. I think he colonized Ireland in 2016 or 2017. But we weren't always a republic, and we wouldn't exist in a stable sense if the British state didn't establish the Irish Free State and Dan Wellesley wasn't Governor General. Dan Wellesley is an extremely significant individual in Irish history that we shouldn't erase. He's in Dublin Castle. I tell all my close friends and circle about him and his history in this group. He essentially established the Saoirse na hÉireann Constitution, Saoirse na hÉireann, I should say, Constitution. He created the Free State and he started the pathway to independence and the community we have now. So both him and Conor Novak are instrumental in the state we live in today.
Yeah.
Oh no, to go ahead if you have any questions.
Well, sorry. In your speech, you said it was not merely a famine of coincidence, but the result of colonialism and genocide. With the contemporary British society, not British society, contemporary global society showing traits of repeating itself and leaning towards global violence and um, building up those divides that we saw so long ago. Not us ourselves, but the history books tell us that they were there and that we are taught to reject. How do you think the Irish people can aim to bring down these, I'm going to use Troubles terminology, but bring down the divides? Because even within our own nation, people are labeling each other as things. People are rejecting the idea of unity. And although they will use it as a campaign point and in their manifestos, as soon as they get into government or in opposition, they entirely throw that out of the door. How do you think the Irish people can progress as a nation with this idea of unity and actually enacting it?
I think it starts with our government ultimately, and it means speaking out when it matters most. I mean, our government cannot be silent. It cannot be a force of negligence and silence in that regard. It must be a loud voice. When conflict breaks out, it must, use that to the very fullest. It cannot be a force for censorship. And I think Ireland is lucky in that regard. We have a very, very professional and proficient foreign affairs department. Um, it needs to continue that. We are on the permanent five, I think, arguably because of our activity diplomatically. And we must continue to be active when it comes proactive, I will say, when it comes to pointing out and determining wrongdoings in the international community. With regard to the domestic situation, it ultimately comes from ourselves. Until we, en masse, choose to equip kindness and tolerance in the face of hate and division, things will remain uh, the same. So we need to continue that.
Mm. Um, Now just a follow up. Well, not a follow up, but a final question from me, and unless my colleagues have another question, and the final question of this interview, which once again, thank you, Hilse. You said in your speech that the famine is still present in the national Irish conscience. It wasn't ancient history just 7 generations ago. So this obviously is an event that shaped Irish culture, Irish history, and our story and also Irish influence, you could say, because Irish people dispersed across the globe to the United Kingdom, to Canada, to Australia, to the United States. And lots of stories came out of the famine. Does your family or do you have any stories about the famine? Was anyone in your family affected by it? Well, everyone in Ireland was, but like, do you have any stories you can recall?
Well, I don't have any stories of intergenerational trauma from the famine. I do know that on my grandmother's uh, ancestry, and she comes from Cork, Mitchelstown area. Um, I know for a fact that her family did have land during the famine, and all she knows anyway is that they dispersed. They either went to America or died. And she does in fact have cousins in America that she speaks to. We have a blanket, a knitted blanket somewhere I know in the house that belongs to those cousins in America, Chicago and Iowa, respectively, and they knitted it and sent it over. But um, ultimately, I do think that my words were important in that there is a national psyche, there is a national sentiment, and although some countries have similar psyche, none will ever be quite the same. Because we all know it goes without saying that history shapes us, history shapes our state, and when we live under the same symbols and banner, we are shaped by those events.
I just want to ask my final question here. You said the question of the future is not whether we must carry that legacy forward, but in fact whether we're willing to do so. What legacy would you say is most important for Ireland to continue carrying forward? Obviously, you have the famine and, the northern border, but do you think there's one key legacy that Ireland should carry on and spread to other nations, like this key idea? Would you like a rephrase of the question? Is the president with us?
Killian,
Oh my
he's
god.
muted. Kathy must have come in.
Ah, right.
What can we speak
No,
about?
the INLA
Sorry
got
about
him
that.
down.
No, it's
Um,
okay.
The INLA got him.
Were you able to hear my question?
I wasn't. No, if you could
Okay, I'll quickly
quickly.
repeat. You said that the question of the future is not whether we must carry that legacy forward, but in fact whether we are willing to do so. Do you think there is one key legacy or idea that Ireland should always carry forward and even presents to other countries as an idea?
Absolutely. Um, I've always said the Irish system of socializing and moderation is our most invaluable asset. The sentiment we carry is our most invaluable asset, and what we've created here is our most invaluable asset. Um, if we could, first of all, that was probably the most important part of my speech. So for those who listened to it, thank you very much. But we do we have the consensus across Irish people isn't should we speak up against injustice, because we all know we should. The question is who and will we have the courage to do so? That should be the new question we consider. And I've considered it closely, and I consider myself to be vocal on matters of importance and matters of resistance. So I think that's a question we should share, and that was the most fundamental part of my speech, really, which is that we're in commemoration of the famine. So obviously that's why we remember. That's why we're here to remember that part of our history. But drawing on that history, we need to stop, with this speak about, speaking out against injustice. It's about will we have the courage and the fortitude to do so. Um, and that doesn't just mean in Ireland; it means across the globe. People in this community are tolerant at best, and at worst, we are negligent. That isn't the case in every community. in every community there are forces of hate, there are forces of criticism, and these are communities where young people ultimately sit and participate. So we should use our positions to make them as safe, and that is a salient point, as safe and as liberated as possible from those forces. Ireland has built that. We must not only protect it, but it is a legacy that we must carry and bring across the globe. So I encourage the people listening, if they are considering it, to join Northern Ireland, to become part and resident to that community, and bring with you the sentiment that we create here at home. Be a diaspora of your own kind. And although it doesn't exactly apply to Roblox, be a diaspora that carries that sentiment with you.
Sorry, just one final thing for me, because viewer put it in. I thought it would be a short question to answer. It said, "Will Killian be going to the private mass in Cork this evening?"
I I can't say I will, in that I live a considerate distance from Cork. I know there was a mass that my grandmother went to today. I'm not sure if it was the one in Cork. I will have to ask.
My grandmother
Um,
was once.
Oh, I didn't
but
realize it was in real life.
keep
Yeah.
keep your your eyes peeled. You might see real life Killian Clark show up. You might not. Just look for a big, muscular,
No, stop it.
hetero man walking in, and that will be Anouk Drone.
Well, if that's what we're defining a twink as today. Well, Erin, finish with your question.
Well, I just like to finish us with a little bit of a statement, I guess. And that despite the famine being such a devastating event, I think we really did learn a lot from how the Irish people handled themselves during the famine. And I think Ireland grew a lot in terms of resilience and in terms of community during the famine. And I think my final question for Killian today would be, what lessons do you think modern Ireland can draw on from the famine in terms of the community aspect?
Well, I in my closing paragraph, I touched on that. Um, I said essentially that the lessons we learn are not drawn on from us here who speak about it and raise awareness and whatnot. They come from the people who suffered during the Great Famine. The lessons we draw on come from those people directly, and that is that where we see oppression, we must not resistance is not always the first matter of instance that we should seize upon. The matter that we should seize upon first is support, humanitarian aid. And I want to end an important note because I don't think we discussed it in the course of this interview. Famine is not a matter of the 19th century. Famine is not a figment of written history and ancient history. Famine happens, it continues to plight people across the globe. And though we are a Western nation that have risen like a phoenix from the ashes out of this situation, it continues to impact people abroad, and in particular, the people of Gaza. And I want to draw a parallel there because the people of Palestine are in a very similar instance to us, in that an oppressive and the only difference, an apartheid state, are managing to obstruct the delivery of aid, not to Hamas, not to armed terrorists, but in fact to mothers and children and elders and men. And that is something that, as humans, there should be an aura of shame, if because when we remark and reflect on the lessons we learned today, there should be a sense of shame, but most importantly, there should be a desire for action. And I encourage all of you that if there's one lesson you take from An Gorta Mór, it's that it isn't just a figment of the past. It lives, it breathes, and the oppression we faced then continues to reside amongst the scourge of this nation nowadays.
Well, thank you, Ahilsa, there with his final remarks during this interview. Unless anyone else has anything to say?
Nope.
Well, it was lovely meeting with you here today, and thank you once again for coming here. It is such a pleasure to host you. Um,
Thank you very much. You're very kind to welcome me.
Well, that is the end of the commemoration for today. I thank you all for watching, and I think that those final closing words of Killian there were quite important to what we remember and such. So hold on, I'm just going to quickly make sure. I just want to see if there's anything from Killian's speech we might want to end on, 'cause I think it was very well written in the sense of memorializing and realizing that these aren't incidents of the past. So I think I'll leave with the paragraph he said was most important. He said, "We must have the courage and audacity to label and resist oppression when we see it. The question of the future is not whether we must carry that legacy forward, but, in fact, whether we are willing to do so. It is unquestioned that Ireland has long been a beacon of reason and understanding on this matter, so no longer is it up for consideration whether we ought to do so. So it is a question of fortitude and resolution to seize upon the matter when it occurs." So I will leave you with that message there. I thank you all for watching today's stream, and let's make sure to remember and commemorate people of our famine and of wars and everything else we see in our lives. Memorial is the most important thing of remembering the past and moving on. So like I said, thank you for watching the stream and have a wonderful rest of your evening and good night. I will probably see you next week for the duel. Goodbye.